Silver Creek, Montana, was the kind of frontier town where everyone knew everyone else's business before breakfast. Nestled between rolling grasslands and distant mountains, it wasn't large enough for secrets to stay hidden for long. News traveled quickly through the church, the general store, and the saloon. Yet despite that, there was one mystery nobody in town could solve. Her name was Clara Bennett. At 27 years old, Clara was the schoolteacher of Silver Creek. She had chestnut brown hair she usually tied neatly behind her head and bright blue eyes that seemed to notice everything. She was respected by nearly everyone. Parents trusted her with their children. Ranchers greeted her when she passed on Main Street. Store owners often saved the freshest produce for her. But what people talked about most wasn't her teaching. It was the fact that Clara Bennett had refused every marriage proposal she'd ever received. Over the years, many men had tried. There had been wealthy cattle ranchers, successful merchants, a banker from a neighboring town, even a state representative who had traveled nearly 50 miles to court her. Every one of them had left disappointed. Not because Clara was cruel. Quite the opposite. She always declined with such kindness that nobody could honestly feel angry. That only made the mystery worse. "She's waiting for someone," old Mrs. Harper often declared. "Or she's married to her work," others would argue. Some believed she intended to move east someday. Others thought she simply enjoyed her independence too much. None of them knew the truth. The truth lived 3 blocks away from the schoolhouse. His name was Ethan Cole. Ethan was 31 years old and owned the blacksmith shop near the edge of town. He wasn't rich. He wasn't particularly handsome in the way storybooks described handsome men. His hands were rough from years of hammering iron. His shirts were usually stained with soot. Most days he returned home smelling faintly of smoke and steel. But there was something about Ethan that people trusted. If he promised to repair a wagon by Friday, it was ready by Friday. If someone couldn't afford his full price, he'd quietly find a solution. When a rancher's barn collapsed during a winter storm 3 years earlier, Ethan had spent 2 weekends helping rebuild it without charging a penny. He never talked about such things afterward. He simply did them. And Clara had loved him for years. The strange part was that Ethan had absolutely no idea. The two of them had grown up together. They attended the same church, shared many of the same friends, saw each other several times every week. To Ethan, Clara was one of the most wonderful people he had ever known. But he had convinced himself long ago that wonderful people belonged with other wonderful people. Successful people. Important people. Men who owned large ranches and wore expensive suits. Not a blacksmith with soot under his fingernails. So he admired her from a safe distance and never imagined she might feel the same way. One bright spring morning, Clara stopped by the blacksmith shop carrying a broken lantern. The familiar sound of hammer striking metal echoed through the building. Ethan looked up from his work and smiled. "Morning, Clara." "Morning, Ethan." The smile she returned was warmer than the sunlight outside. Neither of them seemed to notice. "I was hoping you could fix this." She handed him the lantern. He examined it carefully. "Loose hinge. Easy enough." "How much do I owe you?" He shook his head. "For this?" "Nothing." "Ethan. It's a 5-minute repair." She folded her arms. "You say that every time." He laughed. "You say that every time too." For a moment they simply smiled at each other. The comfortable silence felt natural. It always had. After a few minutes, Clara left for the schoolhouse. Ethan watched her go. Then he returned to work. Across the street, however, someone else had witnessed the exchange. His friend Samuel Reed. Samuel owned the feed store and possessed a remarkable talent for noticing things other people missed. Especially when those other people were idiots. Later that afternoon, Samuel walked into the blacksmith shop. "You know," he said casually, "most men would notice when a woman looks at them the way Clara Bennett looks at you." Ethan nearly dropped a horseshoe. "What are you talking about?" Samuel sighed. "Never mind." But it wasn't never mind. Not even close. Because a few days earlier, another man had arrived in Silver Creek. A man named Victor Hayes. Victor was everything Ethan wasn't. Confident. Wealthy. Well-dressed. He represented a railroad company planning expansion through parts of Montana. By 38, he had already accumulated a considerable fortune. And after seeing Clara at Sunday church service, he became interested immediately. The following week he visited the schoolhouse under the excuse of donating books. The week after that he accompanied Clara home from church. Soon afterward he began appearing regularly around town. People noticed. People always noticed. One evening Clara's father sat on the porch while she watered flowers near the front steps. "Victor Hayes seems to admire you." Clara continued watering. "So I've noticed. He's a respectable man." "I'm sure he is." Her father studied her carefully. "Would you consider him?" The question lingered in the evening air. Clara looked toward the distant mountains. For a long moment she said nothing. Then she answered honestly, "I don't know." That surprised even her. Because for years the answer had always been no. Instantly. Without hesitation. Now it was different. Not because she cared for Victor. She didn't. But because she was becoming tired. Tired of waiting. Tired of hoping. Tired of wondering whether Ethan would ever truly see her. A person could wait only so long before hope became painful. That realization frightened her. Over the next month, Victor's attention became increasingly serious. He brought flowers. Invited her to community events. Spoke with her father several times. Everyone could see where things were heading. Everyone except Ethan. One Saturday afternoon, Clara attended a town picnic beside the river. Families spread blankets beneath cottonwood trees. Children ran through the grass. Musicians played near the water. Ethan arrived late after finishing work at the forge. As usual, Clara noticed him immediately. As usual, her heart lifted. He walked over carrying 2 lemonade cups. Without thinking, he handed one to her. "Thought you might be thirsty." She accepted it. "Thank you." For the next hour they sat together talking about ordinary things. The weather. The school. The upcoming harvest festival. Simple conversations. The sort they'd shared for years. At one point Clara found herself laughing at something he said. Ethan smiled in response. The sight nearly broke her heart. Because it felt so easy. So natural. And yet somehow impossible. Then Victor Hayes appeared. "Miss Bennet." His voice was smooth and confident. Clara's smile faded slightly. Victor nodded politely toward Ethan. "Mr. Cole." Ethan returned the greeting. Victor then turned back toward Clara. "I was hoping to save a seat for you at tonight's music performance." For a moment nobody spoke. Clara glanced at Ethan. Ethan merely smiled. "Sounds like a good evening." That was all. No reaction. No concern. No sign whatsoever that another man might be taking her away. The realization hit Clara harder than she expected. Maybe Samuel Reed was right about Ethan. Maybe he truly didn't see her. Or perhaps worse. Maybe he saw her and simply didn't want her. That night Clara lay awake staring at the ceiling. Outside, crickets sang beneath the Montana stars. Inside, her thoughts refused to settle. For years she had waited patiently. For years she had convinced herself that someday Ethan would realize what stood directly in front of him. But what if someday never came? What if she spent another year waiting? Or 5? Or 10? The question lingered in the darkness. And for the first time in her life, Clara Bennett seriously considered the possibility that she might have to stop waiting. Far across town, Ethan sat alone outside his small house. The night air was cool. The forge was finally quiet. Without understanding why, he found himself thinking about Clara. About her laughter by the river. About the way Victor Hayes seemed determined to stay close to her. A strange feeling settled in his chest. Unfamiliar. Uncomfortable. He couldn't quite identify it. So he ignored it. The trouble was that some feelings don't disappear simply because they're ignored. Sometimes they wait. And sometimes they grow. Without Ethan Cole realizing it, the clock had already started ticking. And very soon he was going to discover that some opportunities in life do not wait forever. The truth arrived on a Tuesday morning. And like most important truths, it arrived disguised as an ordinary conversation. Ethan was repairing a wagon wheel outside the blacksmith shop when Samuel Reed stopped by carrying a sack of feed. Samuel watched him work for a moment. Then he said, "Victor Hayes is planning to ask Clara Bennett to marry him." The hammer froze in Ethan's hand. "What?" Samuel leaned against a fence post. "You heard me." Ethan stared at him. "Who told you that?" "Half the town knows by now." The blacksmith set down his hammer. A strange heaviness settled in his chest. "Are you sure?" Samuel nodded. "Victor spoke with Clara's father yesterday." The silence stretched. A horse shifted nearby. Somewhere farther down Main Street a wagon rattled across the dirt road. Ethan felt oddly disconnected from all of it, as though the town continued moving while something inside him had suddenly stopped. Samuel studied him carefully. Then he asked the question he should have asked years ago. "Do you love her?" Ethan laughed nervously. The sound didn't convince either of them. "I don't know." Samuel shook his head. "That's not true." Another silence. Then Samuel spoke more gently. "Ethan, I've known you 20 years. The blacksmith looked away. "You watch her every time she walks into a room." Ethan didn't respond. "You remember every story she tells." Still nothing. "You light up like a lantern whenever she smiles at you." The words landed harder than Ethan expected, because suddenly he realized Samuel wasn't revealing anything new. He was simply describing things Ethan had always known, things he had refused to name. The realization arrived all at once, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Clara. It had always been Clara. Every future he imagined somehow included her. Every good memory seemed connected to her. Every ordinary day became better when she was nearby. He loved her. God help him, he loved her. And he might lose her. The thought struck with terrifying force. Samuel watched understanding spread across his friend's face. "There it is," he said quietly. Ethan swallowed. "What if I'm too late?" Samuel sighed. "That depends." "On what?" "Whether you finally decide to stop being afraid." That evening Ethan barely slept. For years he had convinced himself Clara deserved someone better. Someone wealthier. Someone more important. Someone like Victor Hayes. But for the first time he questioned that belief. Not because he suddenly thought himself extraordinary. Because he finally realized he had never given Clara the chance to decide for herself. The next afternoon he saw her walking home from the schoolhouse. She carried a stack of books against her chest. The late summer sun painted the street gold. Ethan almost called out. Almost. Then fear stopped him. What if Samuel was wrong? What if Clara only saw him as a friend? What if confessing ruined everything? He watched her continue down the road, and hated himself for staying silent. 3 days later the harvest festival arrived. The entire town gathered in the square. Children played games. Farmers displayed produce. Musicians tuned instruments on a wooden stage. The celebration should have felt joyful. Instead Ethan felt as though he were standing on the edge of a cliff. Everywhere he looked he saw Clara. Talking with families. Laughing with students. Moving through the crowd with her usual warmth. And beside her stood Victor Hayes. Confident. Polished. Certain. Everything Ethan believed he wasn't. Near sunset, Victor escorted Clara toward the edge of the festival grounds. Away from the crowd. Away from the noise. Something inside Ethan finally snapped. He couldn't watch another man take her away. Not without trying. Not without speaking. Not this time. Before he could lose his courage he started walking. Fast. His heart pounded harder with every step. By the time he reached them Victor had just finished saying something. Clara looked surprised. Then she noticed Ethan. The expression on her face changed instantly. "Ethan?" Victor frowned slightly. The blacksmith barely noticed. His attention never left Clara. "Can I speak with you?" Victor looked annoyed. Clara looked concerned. Then she nodded. "Of course." Victor hesitated, but eventually stepped aside. The moment he left, silence settled between them. For several seconds Ethan couldn't find the words. Everything he wanted to say suddenly felt impossible. Clara waited patiently, just as she always had. Finally Ethan took a breath. "Samuel told me about Victor." Her eyes widened slightly. "I see. I also learned something else." She said nothing. "Ethan?" He looked directly at her. Really looked. Not as a friend. Not as a familiar part of life. But as the woman he loved. The woman he should have been fighting for all along. "I learned I'm an idiot." To his surprise, Clara laughed softly. The sound eased some of the tension. "That's a strange place to start." "I know." He ran a nervous hand through his hair. "Unfortunately, it's the truth." For a moment neither spoke. The music from the festival drifted toward them on the evening breeze. Then Ethan continued. "I spent years telling myself you deserved someone better." Clara's expression softened. "Ethan?" "No." He shook his head. "Please let me finish." She nodded. "I thought men like Victor Hayes belonged in your future. He swallowed hard. And because I believe that, I never told you what I should have told you a long time ago. The world seemed to narrow until only Clara remained. Only her eyes. Only her face. Only the possibility that she might walk away. I love you. The words hung between them. Simple. Honest. Terrifying. I think I've loved you for years. His voice grew quieter. I was just too blind to understand it. Clara stared at him. Completely still. Ethan's heart sank. Maybe he truly was too late. Then something unexpected happened. Tears appeared in her eyes. Not sadness. Relief. Beautiful, overwhelming relief. You have no idea how long I've waited to hear that. The words hit him harder than any hammer ever had. What? A small laugh escaped her. Half joy. Half disbelief. Ethan Cole, I have been in love with you for nearly 4 years. For a moment he simply stared, unable to process what he'd heard. 4 years. She nodded. I kept thinking eventually you'd figure it out. The absurdity of it struck both of them at once. Years of waiting. Years of hoping. Years wasted because neither had spoken honestly. Clara shook her head. We could have avoided all this. We really could have. They both laughed. Then neither could stop smiling. The festival music continued behind them. The setting sun painted the sky orange and gold. And for the first time, there were no misunderstandings left between them. Only truth. A week later Ethan arrived at the Bennett house wearing his best shirt. He carried a bouquet of wildflowers. Not expensive flowers. Not fancy flowers. Just flowers Clara loved. Her father opened the door. A knowing smile appeared immediately. Took you long enough. Ethan laughed. Yes, sir. You planning to come inside? I was hoping to. The older man stepped aside. Then stopped standing on my porch. Inside, Clara looked up from the sitting room. The smile she gave him made every year of waiting worthwhile. Over the following months, Silver Creek enjoyed the most discussed courtship in recent memory. The schoolteacher. The blacksmith. Everyone had an opinion. Most simply felt relieved. Especially Samuel Reed. I was beginning to think I'd have to lock both of you in a room together, he informed them one evening. Neither disagreed. Winter arrived early that year. Snow covered the rooftops. Smoke curled from chimneys. The mountains disappeared beneath blankets of white. And on a cold December afternoon Ethan proposed. Not in front of a crowd. Not during a celebration. Just the two of them walking beside the frozen river. Exactly the way Clara would have wanted. When he placed the ring in her hand, she smiled before he even finished speaking. Yes. He laughed. I haven't actually asked yet. You were going to. I was. Then my answer is still yes. They married the following spring. The church was filled with family, friends, and nearly half the town. As Clara walked down the aisle, Ethan felt one overwhelming thought. How close he had come to losing this. How close fear had come to stealing the future they deserved. Years later, when their children asked how they fell in love, Clara always told the same story. Not about the wedding. Not about the proposal. Not even about the happy ending. She told them about the waiting. About the danger of assuming someone already knows what your heart is saying. And Ethan always added the lesson he learned the hard way. Never let fear make decisions for you. Because the greatest mistake of his life wasn't loving Clara Bennett. It was waiting so long to tell her. Fortunately for both of them, forever arrived before it was too late. And sometimes, that is all the miracle a person needs.